Ethan Ward had always thought of himself as a man forged by solitude, shaped by silence. After 20 years in special operations, he had returned to civilian life seeking stillness. He found it in Millbridge, a town too small for crime, too old for ambition, too quiet to question. The people smiled in that cautious, small-town way, all teeth and no trust. And the nights were wrapped in velvet dark, broken only by the hush of wind over pine. He bought the cabin at the edge of town, where the trees grew thick and whispered secrets. No one had lived there in decades. That suited him. The realtor, Mrs. Duval, had avoided his eyes when handing over the keys. "People say it's haunted," she said, then laughed too loud. Silly, right? Ethan hadn't replied. He'd seen ghosts before, not the kind that rattled chains, but the kind that screamed in memory. He moved in on a Sunday. By Wednesday, he knew something was wrong. It wasn't the creaking floors or the shadows that moved when they shouldn't. It was subtler than that. The birds didn't sing near the house. His dog, a Belgian Malinois named Caleb Ward, refused to cross the threshold. And each night, just before sleep took him, Ethan would hear a child's voice whisper, "Not yet." On the 7th night, he dug, not with shovels, but with questions. He spoke to the town librarian, Grace, who wore oversized sweaters and suspicion like armor. She gave him old maps, older rumors. They called it Larkspur Hollow, she said, tracing a finger over faded ink. The trees weren't always here. Something grew them. What kind of something? He asked. The kind that eats light, she said. That night, Ethan stood at the edge of his property and stared into the woods. The trees leaned toward him, as if listening. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "I'm not afraid of you," he lied. The wind laughed. The next day, Grace showed up at his door with a box. Inside, journals, news clippings, a cassette tape labeled 1983. "People disappear here," she said. "Not just physically, mentally. They forget who they are. And you, I remember too much." They listened to the tape together. Static. Then a voice hoarse panicked. "It's in the roots. It watches through the branches. Don't. Let it whisper your name." Then screaming. Then silence. That night, Ethan dreamed of a woman made of bark, her eyes hollow, her smile stitched with vines. She reached for him and said, "Welcome home." He woke with dirt under his nails. Caleb Ward growled at the door, hackles raised. The woods were too quiet. In the morning, Ethan found footprints in the garden's small bear, leading nowhere. Grace researched. Ethan patrolled. And then came the knock. A woman stood on his porch. Early 60s. Silver bun. HOA pin on her lapel. "Karen Whitlock," she said. "We don't like troublemakers in Millbridge." "I'm not looking for trouble," Ethan replied. "Trouble has a way of finding you." She handed him a letter. "Violation notice. Grass too long, fence too short. Fix it or leave." "Or what?" he asked. She smiled. "Or the Hollow will handle it." That night, Caleb Ward vanished. No signs, no struggle, just gone. Ethan tore through the woods, shouting, cursing, begging. And the trees answered back, not with echoes but with laughter. He found the dog at dawn, alive but wrong. Its eyes were too human. It spoke his name in Grace's voice. He shot it, buried it. Grace didn't ask when he showed up bloodied. She just made tea and whispered, "You've seen her." The woman of bark, Sabrina Cross. She nodded. She was the first. The first what? The first root, Grace explained. Centuries ago, Millbridge had been a sanctuary for the outcast, the broken. They came seeking peace. Found Sabrina. She offered healing, connection, growth, but the price was memory. Identity, Will. She grew a family made of flesh and bark and bone. When they resisted, she buried them in the roots. And now? Ethan asked. Now she waits for someone strong enough to carry her. And that's me? Grace didn't answer. The next night, the trees moved, not in the wind but on their own. Ethan watched from the porch as the forest pulsed, breathing. Something crawled from the earth's childs, made of wood and teeth. He shot it, burned the remains. The fire screamed. By morning, the grass had grown a foot. The fence was taller. Karen Whitlock arrived with a clipboard. Nice improvements. She said, "But you're too late." "Too late for what?" "A route is chosen." She touched his chest. "And it's you." He shoved her back. She didn't fall. She floated, then vanished. Grace called it blooming. The point at which the hollow begins to flower was happening faster now. Ethan found leaves in his sink, mushrooms in his shoes. He started forgetting things: his name, his past. Grace anchored him with stories. "You fought in Kandahar," she'd remind him. "You saved lives. You are Ethan." But the hollow fought back. It sent dreams, voices, old regrets. He saw Sabrina cross again, naked, bleeding sap, offering him a crown of roots. "Be my king," she whispered. "Grow with me." He almost said yes. But Grace slapped him awake. "Don't let her bloom in you." Together, they planned. Salt lines, iron nails, holy water. They dug trenches, set traps. Okay. And waited. On the 13th night, the trees parted. Sabrina came. Not alone. Behind her, the townsfolk hollow-eyed, smiling, changed. Grace whispered, "They're all rooted." Ethan stepped forward. "You want me? Come take me." Sabrina reached. He stabbed her with iron. She screamed, splitting into spores. The townsfolk collapsed. The trees howled. The earth shook. And then silence. Morning broke. Millbridge was empty. Grace wept. Ethan stared at his hands, bark growing beneath the skin. "It's not over," he said. "It never was," she replied. Together, they burned the cabin, watched the flames dance. From the ashes, a flower bloomed, black petals, red core. It pulsed once, then died. Grace smiled. "We cut the root." Ethan wasn't sure. The woods were quiet, too quiet. He felt something inside coiled, waiting. But for now, they had one. For now. But for now, they had one. For now. 2 days later, Ethan Ward was sitting on the cabin porch with a mug of black coffee in his hand, staring at the trees and trying to convince himself that the silence was real this time. Grace had returned to town to check historical records, while Ethan busied himself boarding up old crawl spaces and setting iron nails at every threshold. The scent of burnt bark still lingered around the cabin's perimeter. Caleb Ward had started acting like his old self again, tail wagging, eyes alert, no longer haunted by whatever had clawed into him from the hollow. That peace lasted until the black SUV pulled into the driveway, kicking up a dust cloud that drifted like smoke. Out stepped a man Ethan didn't recognize, mid-30s military posture, expensive boots, and sharp eyes. He flashed a badge. "Marshal." "Riker Dia." Ethan nodded but didn't relax. "You're not here about the grass violations, I take it?" Riker smirked. "No, Mr. Ward. I'm here because of the roots under your land." That afternoon turned into a briefing that felt more like a war council. Riker brought maps, files, aerial photos, and a name that made Ethan's blood Karen Whitlock. "You've tangled with her," Riker said. "But we believe she's more than just a nuisance. She's the regional logistics coordinator for the Juarez cartel." Ethan blinked. "You're telling me a silver-haired HOA president is running a drug empire?" Riker opened a manila folder and slid it across the table. Surveillance photos. Karen shaking hands with men who didn't smile. Maps of underground passages. Inventory lists. "We believe she's using HOA regulations to clear properties near cave access points. Your cabin is sitting on a major tunnel intersection." Grace returned just in time to hear that bombshell. "I told you the trees weren't natural," she said, pale. Riker continued. "We've been monitoring the situation for a while. Your incident accelerated the timeline. We're moving in, but we need your help. Your cabin is ground zero." "You want to use me as bait?" Ethan asked. "Not just bait," Riker replied. "We want you to be part of Operation Hollowsweep." That night, the plan took shape. Riker and his team outfitted the cabin with surveillance equipment, motion sensors, heat scanners, and reinforced doors. Grace moved in, under the pretense of being Ethan's fiancée. They played house while preparing for war. On the 4th day, Caleb Ward alerted them, growling at the tree line. Through binoculars, Ethan spotted movement. not animals. Men. Armed, disguised as contractors. Karen arrived the next morning, clipboard, sunglasses. Her smile was razor wire. "New paint job looks lovely," she said, eyes scanning the roof line. "Just thought I'd stop by to remind you about tomorrow's compliance inspection." "I'm looking forward to it," Ethan said. "You should bring friends." "Oh, I will," Karen replied, turning to leave. Riker whispered, "That was a threat." Ethan nodded, and an invitation. The following morning, the compliance inspection team arrived in 4 SUVs, 12 men, all carrying what looked like toolkits. But Ethan recognized the weight distribution in their steps. Firearms. Kevlar. Not HOA volunteers, these were cartel soldiers. Karen stood on the porch like a queen. "We're just here to make sure everything's up to code," she chirped. Riker was hidden in the attic, with Grace monitoring the video feeds. Ethan opened the door, calm, collected. "Let's begin then." The cartel thugs spread out, pretending to inspect gutters and siding. One entered the basement. Another lingered too long by the back door. Caleb snarled but stayed at heel. Grace whispered over comms, "They're trying to locate the entrances." Riker replied, "Let them." At 2:17 p.m., one of the fake inspectors signaled. Karen gave a nod. 3 of the men drew weapons, silenced pistols, and moved toward Ethan. But before they could breach, the front yard erupted. D agents burst from the tree line. Flashbangs exploded. Karen screamed. Gunfire tore through the air. Ethan ducked behind the staircase, drawing his sidearm. Grace sprinted to the panic room, dragging Caleb with her. Riker descended like an avenging angel from the attic, rifle in hand. The cartel soldiers weren't prepared for a federal ambush. Within 90 seconds, 7 were down. 2 surrendered. 3 ran and vanished into the woods. Karen, she was gone, disappeared in the chaos. Riker paced the porch, furious. She had an escape plan. They found her SUV half a mile away, still running. Blood on the driver's seat. A single white hair snagged on the headrest. "She's injured," Grace said. "That means she's desperate." Riker assembled a tracking team. Ethan insisted on going. They followed boot prints, broken branches, and droplets of blood deep into the forest. At sunset, they found an old hatch buried under pine needles. Riker pried it open. A tunnel narrow, damp, lined with roots. "This leads to the hollow," Grace whispered. "No. Turning back now," Ethan said, descending first. The air grew colder. The walls closed in. Their lights flickered. Ethan felt the weight of the place, the same presence from his dreams. At the end of the tunnel, they found a chamber. Huge, lined with crates of narcotics, weapons, and documents. A command center built into the roots. And Karen collapsed on the floor, bleeding from her leg. "Don't come closer," she rasped. "Holding a detonator. I'll blow us all to hell." Riker leveled his gun. "Put it down, Karen," she laughed. "You think this is about drugs? About money? The hollow is alive? I was only feeding it." Ethan stepped forward, calm. "You're not a queen. You're a pawn, and the game's over." She pressed the trigger. Nothing happened. Grace stepped. From the shadows, holding a second device, "We disabled it." "Your power's gone," Karen screamed, lunged. Ethan tackled her. Riker cuffed her. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, trafficking, attempted murder, and being a royal pain in the ass." They emerged from the tunnel as dawn broke. Helicopters circled overhead. Agents swarmed the forest. Gata barked triumphantly. Grace leaned on Ethan, exhausted but smiling. "We did it," she said. "We really did." But Ethan wasn't celebrating. He looked at the forest, at the trees that still leaned toward him, at the roots that still whispered. Karen was in custody. The drugs were confiscated, the network dismantled. But something remained, something deeper, something older. He could feel it in the soles of his feet. The hollow wasn't done. The hollow wasn't done, and neither was he. Even as the helicopters disappeared into the clouds and the federal agents hauled away crates of evidence, Ethan Ward stood with his boots sunk in the damp forest floor and listened. Beneath the surface hum of wind and engines, He heard it, that slow, rhythmic pulsing deep below the roots, like a second heartbeat. It was fainter than before, yes, but it was still there. Grace noticed his stillness. "You hear it again?" she said gently. "Don't try to deny it." Ethan nodded once. "We took Karen down. But she wasn't the root of this thing. Just a gardener." Marshal Riker was already coordinating with the federal cleanup crew, but when Ethan approached with his concerns, he was met with a tired wave of dismissal. "You've done your part, Ward," Riker said. "Let us handle the rest." "You don't understand," Ethan replied. "This thing, it's alive. It's ancient. You can't just file it away and move on." But Riker had already moved on. Within 24 hours, the woods were declared secure. The tunnel entrance was collapsed. The cabin remained abandoned, watched over by a single guard post and surrounded by motion detectors. Grace returned to her library job, but she visited Ethan every night, bringing books, news, and warmth. For a brief time, it seemed like things might finally settle, and the dreams returned. This time, they weren't just of Sabrina Cross. Ethan began seeing others, men, women, even children, standing beneath the trees. Eyes glowing faint green, mouths open, but silent. One night, he dreamed he was buried beneath the cabin, vines threading through his bones, whispering his name. When he woke, his palms were streaked with dirt. Caleb Ward whimpered and nudged his face as if trying to wake him from something deeper than sleep. Grace began keeping a journal of Ethan's episodes. She found him once standing at the edge of the woods, motionless for hours. Another time he tried to climb into the ashes of the fireplace, mumbling about opening the gate. She called Riker. He sent a psychiatrist. The woman lasted 10 minutes before fleeing in tears. "There's something in him," she said. "Something that looks back when you look too long." Ethan knew she was right. The hollow hadn't just chosen him, it had entered him. It had marked him. That was when Grace suggested something unthinkable. "We go back," she said. "We find the real root, the origin, for it finds you." They gathered what they could: iron stakes, old maps, a journal from one of the hollow's earliest victims. At midnight, they returned to the site of the collapsed tunnel. Grace had found a second entrance buried in an old mining map, nearly 2 miles north of the cabin. They found the spot by moonlight, hidden beneath a collapsed windmill. Ethan tore at the soil with bare hands, uncaring of the scrapes and cuts. The earth seemed to resist at first, but then it gave way with a sigh. They descended. The new tunnel was narrower, older. The roots here were different, thicker, darker, pulsing softly with a dim green glow. Ethan tried not to touch them, but sometimes they reached for him. After 20 minutes, they reached a chamber unlike the others. This one wasn't man-made. The walls pulsed like muscle. In the center stood a tree, blackened, leafless, yet humming with power. Sabrina was waiting, but not as before. She had changed. She now towered over them, a twisted mix of bark, bone, and human features. Her face flickered with dozens of expressions, some Ethan recognized as his own. "You came back," she said. Voice echoed like wind through glass. "You brought the anchor." Grace stiffened. "What do you want from him?" Sabrina smiled. "He carries memory, sorrow, guilt, perfect soil. I only wish to grow." "You already tried," Ethan said, drawing an iron stake, "and we burned." You burned a bloom," she replied, "not the root." Grace held a small vial of holy water and splashed it on the tree. The bark hissed, screamed. The chamber trembled. "That's enough," Sabrina hissed. "You'll kill us." "All, that's the idea," Ethan said. But just as he raised the stake, the ground split beneath him. He fell. Grace screamed his name. Darkness swallowed him whole. When he awoke, he was somewhere else. Underground still, but deeper. Warmer, he lay in a chamber lined with mirrors, except they reflected not his body, but his past, Kandahar. His brother's funeral, the time he let a hostage die, his worst regrets played on loop. He tried to look away, but the vines held his head steady. Sabrina's voice whispered in his ear. "Let it go. Let me take them. They're mine, he muttered. Not anymore. The vines tightened. He felt his memories slipping, faces blurring, dates vanishing, names turning to dust. Then came a scream, not his. Grace. She had followed. She had jumped into the abyss for him. Her voice cut through the hallucinations. Ethan, remember who you are. The vines hissed. The mirrors cracked. Ethan roared and tore himself free, splinters cutting deep. He sprinted toward the sound of Grace's voice, found her cornered by Sabrina, who now had arms like branches and eyes like flames. Leave her, Ethan shouted. Take me instead. Sabrina paused. Would you truly? Give yourself for her? I already did. He lunged. The stake plunged into her chest. Her scream shook the tunnel. Grace threw the holy water. It ignited on contact. The tree burst into flames. Roots recoiled. The chamber began to collapse. Ethan grabbed Grace's hand and ran. The ground crumbled behind them. Fire raced ahead. They reached the windmill seconds. Before the tunnel imploded, the forest lit with unnatural fire green and white. Trees screamed. Animals fled. And then all was still. Morning came. Sun rose for the first time without shadows. Grace held Ethan as he wept. It's over, she said. The root is gone. But Ethan shook his head. Something stayed behind. I can feel it. Grace looked into his eyes. Saw it too. A flicker of green. A whisper. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. Asterisk. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. Ethan Ward knew it the moment he opened his eyes the next morning and saw the flicker of green in the reflection of his coffee. The sun rose warm and clean over the treetops, but the air still carried. That whispered a faint for most ears, but not his. Caleb stood on the porch, tail stiff, ears trained on the tree line, letting out low, uncertain growls that sounded almost mournful. Grace was already moving around the cabin, packing a bag. Can't stay here, she said simply. We don't even know how far it spread. Ethan nodded. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night rereading the journal pages, re-examining the sketches, the maps, and the passages from those who had come before them. The hollow had roots in more than just the ground it lived in. People, fed on pain and secrets. Grace's research uncovered a name buried in one of the earlier entries, Deborah Winslow, a botanist. I'd studied anomalies in the forest 40 years ago. Her findings were discredited, her property later condemned. But Ethan and Grace now knew better. By noon, they were at Deborah's old cottage, now half swallowed by vines. The mailbox was broken. The porch collapsed. But inside, they found stacks of journals, plant samples suspended in fluid, and photographs that made Ethan's blood run cold. Images of people standing near black-rooted trees, each of them with faint green glows in their eyes. In the back of one journal was a list of names, all of them crossed out except two. Karen Whitlock and Harrison Black. He's still out there, Grace whispered. The supplier, Ethan said. Karen was just logistics. Didn't have to wait long. That night, while Ethan sat in the cabin alone, watching Caleb pace with restless tension, a shadow moved beyond the tree line. Ethan reached for his weapon but stopped when a voice rasped from the dark. You're in my house now. Harrison Black stepped into the clearing like a ghost wearing skin. Was older than expected but strong with long gray hair. Eyes like smoked glass and hands calloused from both work and war. He wore a hunter's coat and carried a walking stick that pulsed faint green at the tip. You think you've won? He said. You burned a root, not the tree. Ethan remained still. I don't want war. Then leave, Harrison said. Let the hollow grow. It feeds on people. So does civilization. Caleb growled, fur bristling. Harrison glanced down at him. Your dog's seen it too. That's why he's never quite been right since. Ethan stepped forward. You helped Karen. She helped herself. I just planted the seeds. Then you'll dig your own grave. Harrison smiled, turned, and vanished into the forest. Ethan didn't sleep that night. Instead, he mapped the next steps. If Harrison was the source, if he truly planted what Karen harvested, then his land had to be the origin. Grace returned at dawn with confirmation. Aerial scans. soil samples. Harrison's property sat atop the thickest root cluster yet discovered miles of intertwined tendrils pulsing with the same bioluminescence they'd seen before. "We go in," Ethan said. "Tonight, Riker refused them backup. You're not federal agents," he snapped. "You've done enough." But Ethan hung up and packed anyway. Grace was already locking in holy water vials and iron stakes. "This time, we end it," she said. "No halfway measures." They left before sunset. Caleb ran ahead, sniffing out the trail, ears alert. Harrison's property was unguarded, overgrown and silent. Too silent. No birds, no insects. Not even wind. Just a heavy pressure in the air, like standing in a vacuum. They found the entrance under a greenhouse glass shattered, roots growing like veins across the floor. Harrison was waiting in the center, alone. "You brought the librarian again," he said with a grin. "She's braver than you." "She's smarter too," Ethan replied. Grace lit a flare. The roots recoiled. "You're killing it," Harrison said. "The forest breathes because of me." Then Grace replied, throwing the flare at his feet. He screamed out in pain, but in rage. The floor collapsed beneath them. They fell into a chamber. Not one built by humans, but carved by time, soil, and intent. Here the roots pulsed like arteries. In the center grew something monstrous, a heart, a root heart, alive, beating, glowing. "That's its core," Grace whispered. "It's what Karen fed, what Sabrina was trying to protect." Harrison landed between them. "You don't understand," he said. "This isn't evil, it's survival. It remembers, it heals, consumes," Ethan corrected, raising the stake. "And now it ends." The heart pulsed violently. Vines lashed out. Caleb jumped, biting and tearing. Harrison screamed, as one vine wrapped around his leg and pulled him into the root mass. He didn't fight. He welcomed it. "Let it take me," he said. "I'll live forever in the hollow." The vines swallowed him whole. The heart pulsed harder. Grace hurled the vials of holy water. They shattered against the bark, sizzling, screaming. The heart convulsed. Ethan stabbed the stake deep into the center, feeling it resist, then yield. A shockwave ripped through the chamber, roots writhed. The air turned to fire. Caleb barked once, then silence. Ethan grabbed Grace. "Run." They bolted through a collapsing tunnel. Behind them, the heart howled as it tore itself apart. Earth quaked, stone crumbled. The forest lit up like a dying star. They emerged from the greenhouse seconds before it caved in, burying the heart, Harrison, and all. The night went silent again, not like before but clean, empty, as if something massive had exhaled for the final time. Back at the cabin, Grace treated Ethan's wounds. Caleb slept, breathing deep, finally at peace. Ethan sat on the porch again, watching the horizon. No whispers, no dreams, no pulsing in the soil. "It's over," Grace said. "This time, really over." Ethan nodded. Slowly, but deep in the woods, something still stirred. Watching, waiting. It wasn't the same kind of presence that had inhabited. Karen Whitlocker whispered through Harrison Black's veins. This was older, deeper, and it didn't need a name. Ethan. Ward felt it like a low tremor in his spine, a whisper in his blood every time he stood near the tree line. Grace noticed the change in him. Since they had returned from destroying the root heart beneath Harrison's greenhouse, Ethan had grown quieter. His eyes stayed fixed on the forest for minutes at a time, and he'd sometimes speak in his sleep, muttering phrases in a language Grace didn't recognize. Caleb, their loyal German shepherd, taken to sleeping, curled at Ethan's feet every night, growling softly at the shadows. Grace kept her notes close. She had started building a timeline, tracing the patterns of the Hollow's awakenings. Through history, Millbridge wasn't the first town to suffer from it. There were similar incidents in Oregon, Quebec, even as far as Eastern Europe. Always the same signs: people hearing whispers, sudden disappearances, impossible growths, strange dreams. And in every instance, the survivors claimed it had ended only for it to resurface decades later in a new form. And she feared they had only delayed the inevitable. One night, She woke to find Ethan gone. She followed the faint trail of his boots in the dew and found him standing at the center of the clearing, facing the woods. His hands were at his sides, relaxed. His eyes were open, but they didn't see her. "Ethan," she said softly, "come back inside." He didn't move. "It's calling," he said. "It knows my name." "Then forget its voice," she said, stepping forward. "It has no power over you unless you give it. It already has some," he said. "From the moment I touched the first root, from the moment I dreamed of Sabrina Cross, I'm a vessel, and we drain it," Grace said. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small carved totem wrapped in iron wire and soaked in salts, something she had fashioned from Deborah Winslow's notes. She placed it in Ethan's hand. The reaction was immediate. Ethan jerked back, as if burned, gasping as black smoke curled from his skin. His knees buckled, and Grace caught him. When his eyes cleared, he looked at her like he hadn't seen her in days. "It was inside me," he whispered, still trying. "But not strong enough," Grace said. "Not anymore." They knew then they had to go further. They wanted to destroy the hollow completely. They needed to find its source, not just its roots, but its seed. Grace's research pointed them to an old mental institution 2 counties over, long shut down and now lost to nature. Before it was closed, it had received 6 patients from Millbridge. All had been labeled paranoid, schizophrenics. All had drawn the same symbols, spirals, trees with eyes, roots forming faces. One patient, Sabrina Cross's great-grandmother, had died there. Another had been listed under an alias, Jasper Ravencraft. The man who had built the cabin Ethan now lived in. They left at dawn. The road to the asylum was barely passable, overgrown with vines and broken pavement. The building loomed from the fog like a corpse still refusing to decay. Inside, the walls were damp, covered in moss and mold. Patient records had been left to rot. Grace found what she needed in the basement, a map drawn in blood and ash that showed a tree. Not any tree, but the first tree. The words etched beside it read, "The seed beneath the spine." Right. Stared at it for a long time. "It's in Millbridge," he said. "Not just the forest, beneath the town." Grace's fingers trembled as she traced the map. "If we go there, we might not come back. If we don't, it will never end." They returned to Millbridge under cover of darkness. The heart had been destroyed, but they suspected the seed was buried far deeper somewhere beneath the town's very foundation. Using Deborah's geological records, they found the oldest structure in Millbridge, the original church. Long abandoned, hidden in the woods behind the new developments. It had no cross, just a stone spire and a door that led down. They descended with lanterns and weapons. The air grew thicker the deeper they went, until breathing felt like inhaling syrup. The stairs ended at a door made of ironwood, bound with bone. Ethan pushed it open. The chamber beyond was impossibly large, far bigger than the building above it. The walls were formed from roots, twisting and pulsing. At the center was the seed, a black sphere, the size of a truck, wrapped in tendrils and floating just above. The ground, it beat like a heart. Grace stared at it. "It's not just a plant," she said. "It's thinking." Ethan nodded. "It's dreaming." They approached slowly. Caleb growled but didn't enter. As they neared the seed, the air grew hotter. The whispers returned not just from the chamber, but inside their minds. Join, grow, forget. Ethan clutched his head. Grace grabbed his hand and pushed the totem into his palm again. Screamed. It pulsed violently, lashing out with a root that struck the ground between them. Ethan pulled out the last of their iron stakes. "We pierce it. We burn it. We bury it. Together," Grace said. They plunged the stake into the seed's base. The sphere shrieked, split open, and released a torrent of black sap that hissed as it hit the ground. Roots lashed out, striking the walls, the floor, each other. Grace threw fire salts, and Ethan hurled a flask of holy oil. Chamber caught flame not. Normal fire, but white-hot light that burned without smoke. The seed writhed, cracked, and began to shrink. "Run!" Grace shouted. The ceiling groaned. Rocks began to fall. They sprinted back up the stairs as the chamber collapsed. Behind them, the fire roared louder than a jet engine. They emerged into the forest gasping, covered in ash and sap. Behind them, the church caved in entirely, leaving only a crater and the smell of ozone. The wind blew differently now, clean, crisp. No more whispers, no more weight, just silence. Ethan collapsed to his knees. Caleb licked his face. Grace sat beside him, holding his hand. "I think that was it," she whispered. That was the true route. Ethan looked at her. "We'll see," he said. "If I sleep tonight and don't dream of trees, I'll believe you." That night they slept deeply, undisturbed. No whispers, no visions, no stirrings in the soil. No whispers, no visions, no stirrings in the soil. For the first time in weeks, Ethan Ward awoke to true silence, the kind that felt earned rather than imposed. Sunlight filtered through the cabin's windows, and Caleb lay sprawled across the floor in the kind of unbothered rest he hadn't known since the hollow first made its presence felt. Grace was already up, standing by the stove, pouring hot water over coffee grounds with her sleeves pushed up and her hair tied back. She looked at peace, as if the world had taken a breath and exhaled the weight of months of tension. I didn't dream," Ethan said. "Me neither," she replied. "I checked the monitors. No fluctuations. No thermal spikes. Nothing in the soil. Nothing." They both smiled, but it was cautious. The smile of survivors who didn't quite believe the war had truly ended. Grace slid a stack of hand-drawn maps across the table. "This is everything we know: where it started, how it spread, how we stopped it." Ethan looked them over, each map marked with circles and scrawled notations, arrows and timestamps. "We published this," she said. "It's not just to warn people, but to educate, to protect. They'll call us conspiracy theorists. Let them. Truth doesn't care what names people call it." They spent the rest of the day organizing. Evidence. Drone footage from Harrison Black's property. The chemical analysis of the root sap. Deborah Winslow's journals. Old news clippings. Ethan found an old cassette tape hidden in one of Jasper Ravencraft's journals. It's now under Ethan's name as the new occupant. He played it, and an elderly voice echoed from the speakers. "The hollow is not evil," it said. "It is memory. It is echo. But when left unchecked, memory can grow teeth." The tape was dated 1962, that night. They uploaded everything to multiple servers, some private, others public. They wrote anonymous posts on forums, submitted encrypted files to researchers, even leaked a few samples to environmental watchdogs. Ethan knew the hollow wasn't done. It had simply retreated like a tide going out before the next storm. They needed the world to know what could come back. A week passed, then two. No incidents. The town began to breathe again. People returned to their routines. Kids played near the woods again. The sheriff, Marshall Riker, made a public statement about a minor gas leak and unrelated wildlife disturbances, and the town swallowed it, grateful for something easy to believe. Ethan and Grace didn't argue. They had other work to do. On the 15th day, a letter arrived. No postage, no return address. Inside was a single photo, Caleb sitting outside the cabin, sleeping peacefully. But the timestamp was from the night before, and neither Ethan nor Grace had taken it. Ethan scanned the area, but found no tracks, no sign of intrusion. Whoever had taken the photo had been careful. Grace enhanced the image. In the reflection of the cabin window, there was a faint shape. A woman, her face blurred, but her stance unmistakable. "That's Karen Whitlock," Grace whispered. "It can't be," Ethan said. "She's dead," so was Harrison. They checked the footage from their trail cams. One by one, each. Camera had gone dark between 1:03 and 1:05 a.m., 2 minutes of blindness. When they came back online, the forest looked undisturbed. Grace activated the emergency beacon buried near the old greenhouse site. It pinged once, then silence. Ethan's jaw tightened. She's back, or something that remembers being her. That night, Grace set a perimeter iron filings, blessed chalk, UV tripwires. Ethan stayed up, rifle across his lap, Caleb, by his side. At 2:12 a.m., the wind changed, blew inward, from the forest toward the cabin. Caleb stood, ears back. Grace crept to the window. Nothing moved. But then they heard its soft footsteps, not approaching, but circling. Slow, deliberate. Ethan stepped outside. "Karen," he shouted, "you're dead. Stay that way." A voice replied, not from the woods, but from inside the trees themselves. "You broke the root, but not the memory." Grace joined him, holding a flare gun. "Show yourself." "Why would I?" the voice said. "You never showed me mercy." A shape flickered at the tree-liner woman in a dark dress, face wrapped in roots like a veil. Grace fired the flare. It struck the ground near the shape and exploded in light. The figure vanished. "We have to go back," Grace said. "Back to the crater. Something's growing again." At dawn, they returned to the collapsed church. The ground was still scorched, the air metallic. But near the center of the crater, they saw something new sprout. It's 2 inches tall, but unmistakably the same species as the seed. Ethan knelt, heart pounding. It's regrowing, faster than before. They debated burning it, digging it up, pouring salt. But Grace stopped. "It's bait," she said. "It wants us here. To distract us." "Then what's the real play?" That night they got their answer. Emily Harris, a local teacher and one of the few who had helped them early on, called them in a panic. "My students, they drew something. All of them, the same thing. They met her at the school." The children's drawings were pinned to the walls, trees with eyes, cabins surrounded by vines, and one image of Ethan himself standing in the forest, eyes glowing green. "They said they saw it in their dreams," Emily whispered. Grace checked the dates. The dreams began the same night they received the photo of Caleb. Ethan paced. "It's not just coming back, spreading through thought. Through memory, through people," Grace said. "Through us." They needed help, but they couldn't trust Riker. They contacted Agent Dana Rhodes, one of the few federal officials who had believed them during the early investigation. She arrived within hours, bringing a small team of specialist biologists, spiritualists, exorcists. They scanned the town, the woods, even the school. The results were terrifying. "There's a frequency," Dana said. "Something embedded. In the soil, it's like a pulse. A call." "To what?" Ethan asked. "To itself," she replied. "To whatever pieces still remain." "Then we have to stop it again," Grace said. Dana handed them a device, a sonic disruptor designed to collapse root systems. "We'll hit it at the source," she said. Tonight, as the sun set, they returned to the crater. The sprout had grown another inch, and now pulsed faintly, as if sinking to a beat they couldn't hear. Dana placed the disruptor, activated the sequence. It hummed, then shrieked. The ground shook. Roots burst from the soil, flailing wildly. One struck Dana across the chest, throwing her back. Grace fired her last flare. Ethan poured salt into the crater. The sprout shriveled, turned black. The earth went still. Dana coughed, sat up, and smiled. "That felt final," she said, but Ethan wasn't sure. That night, the dreams returned. This time, Ethan Ward was aware. In his dream, the forest was silent, coated in a silver mist, the kind that clung to his skin and whispered in riddles he couldn't quite grasp. He stood in a clearing with trees that arched above like cathedral walls, their bark pulsing with veins of faint green light. Ahead, beneath a towering tree with no visible top, stood Karen Whitlockor, what had once worn her face. She turned slowly, and where eyes should have been, there were only hollow sockets leaking black sap. "You thought roots could be burned," she said. "But you forgot about seeds carried by the wind." "You're not Karen," Ethan replied. "You're just a fragment. I am memory. Memory of pain. Memory of hunger. You destroyed one anchor, but the story remains. And stories grow." Ethan raised his hands. In one, he held the totem Grace had reforged, now wrapped in 3 layers of iron thread and etched with symbols found in Deborah Winslow's notes. "This ends here," he said. "Not with flame, not with blood, with silence. He pressed the totem to the tree. The mist screamed, roots split apart, sky above fractured like glass. And Ethan fell out of the dream and back into himself, gasping, soaked in sweat. Grace was already awake, staring out the window. "Something's changed," she said. "I felt it. A shift." Outside, the woods were quiet. Too quiet. Not just silent, but absent. The usual sense of being watched was gone. The trees stood still. The soil beneath them didn't hum. Ethan stepped outside barefoot. Caleb followed. The ground felt normal. No heartbeat. No tremor. Nothing. Dana Rhodes arrived that morning with a satellite image. The anomaly we tracked, it's gone. Whatever signal was bouncing around Millbridge has stopped. Completely. Then it worked, Grace said. The dream confrontation. He severed the narrative. Dana studied them. "Do either of you feel different?" "Lighter," Ethan said. "But also, like I've forgotten something." "That's how." "You know, it worked," Dana replied. "The hollow fed on memory, on obsession, on people needing answers. Starve it of that tanned, it dies." They spent the next week cleaning up what remained. Grace worked with Emily Harris to retrain the kids, who'd drawn the symbols using art therapy and storytelling exercises. They turned the trees into characters, gave them endings. It worked. The drawings stopped. Ethan rebuilt the greenhouse not to grow plants, but to grow control. He kept samples of the original root sap locked in airtight canisters sealed behind. Layers of silver mesh and blessed glass, to use but to study, to understand, to ensure it never fooled anyone again. Caleb stayed by his side, always alert, always watching the tree line. The town of Millbridge recovered. Slowly, then all at once. People stopped whispering about missing persons and strange lights. The sheriff, Marshall Riker, retired suddenly and moved west. Logan Price bought the old school and converted it into a community center. Sabrina Cross's name was cleared in the town records. Her grave was restored with a new plaque. She knew the truth. Grace and Ethan published under aliases. The paper went viral in fringe scientific circles. Most laughed. Few took it seriously. One researcher reached out from Iceland, another from South Korea. Both claimed similar phenomena. Ethan kept their files. He didn't respond. Not yet. He wasn't ready to dive back in, but the signs remained. Not in Millbridge, but in the world. One day a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a notebook, old, weathered. It contained drawing spirals, trees, eyes, and at the back, a name, Greg Whitlock, Karen's husband, supposedly dead for years. "It's starting again," Grace said, flipping through it. "Or maybe it never really ended," Ethan replied. That night they burned the book, but not before copying its contents. Grace stored it in their encrypted drive, just in case. 2 months later, they took a trip north. A break. A reset. But even in the mountains, Ethan noticed something odd. A tree, out of place. A dog barking at a patch of empty air. A child drawing circles in the sand. Grace saw it too. "It's like it's following us." "No," Ethan said. "It's remembering us. Then we have to make it forget." They returned home. Planted trees of their own apple oak. Pine, trees with names and roots they understood. They covered the land with symbols, not mystical ones, but personal. Photos, memories, journals, stories. They drowned the hollow's whispers in noise. And it worked, at least for now. But sometimes in the early morning, Ethan would stand at the edge of the property and swear he could see movement just at the corner of his eye. A figure, tall and still, watching, waiting. He never approached. Neither did it. A stalemate. One day, perhaps it would try again, but he'd be ready. They both would. And until then, they lived. Truly lived, without fear, without roots in the past. And in a place once haunted by darkness, light returned, not because they destroyed the hollow, but because they remembered who they were without it. And when the next storm came, and it would come, they wouldn't just survive, they'd fight. With truth, with each other, with everything they had. Because memory may grow roots, but so does hope.